Welcome back. This is part 6 of Sibylla's story. Let's continue the journey with the new chapter titled Farewell, Thou Golden Sun. Best beloved one, wanting thee, what were all the world to me? With its sunshine, love, and flowers, with its brightest, happiest hours. Best beloved one, wanting thee, what were all the world to me? Sunshine mocks me with its play, love lives out but half his day. Brightest hours are fraught with gloom, flowers waste their sweet perfume. Best beloved one, wanting thee, what were all the world to me? Life were one long weary moan, yielding nothing to atone for a hopeless night of fear, dark and desolate and drear. Best beloved one, wanting thee, what were all the world to me? Life is life alone with thee, love is love eternally. Press me closely to thy heart, life nor death can bid us part. Best beloved one, having thee, love is all the world to me. Cornelia McFadden. Deep silence reigned in Lady von Herbig's residence, for she was very ill. Heavy draperies were suspended from the windows, the bell was muffled, and no visitors were received save Herr Bolton, who stood faithfully at the side of the inmates. But this calm only reigned externally. In the hearts of both sick one and daughter the billows rolled high. The attendant physician's face was grave. He shook his head and called several times during the day. Sibylla would not have been Sibylla if these indications had not been intelligible to her. Lady von Herbig continually exclaimed that she would never rise from this sickbed, but upon this Sibylla reckoned little. So long as she could remember, her mother had prophesied her death not only every year, but every month. This time, however, it was serious. Sibylla had herself asked the doctor whether her mother's death was imminent, and he replied, "So long as there is breath, there may be hope." Meanwhile, and a significant gesture closed the conversation. Then Sibylla perfectly understood the situation. Those are bitter hours when a daughter stands by the bedside of a dying mother with whom she has not been kindly. But still more bitter will it be if conscience speaks loudly of neglected duty, of love withheld, and will not be silenced. Sibylla's nature was so different from her mother's that she had always found herself in opposition to her. If Sibylla had been weak, she had conformed to her mother's opinions and ways, but she was quite the contrary. How often, therefore, had they met in collision? Oh, what would Sibylla now give to have blotted out all those scenes? How she was stung by the recollection of her mother's helplessness, who, in spite of all her eccentricities at the foundation, lived only to prove her love for her child. And now Sibylla would reach out both hands to keep this mother if she could, for when she was gone, she should stand more solitary and alone than many others. Besides, the thought of death caused a shudder. She had always kept aloof from such scenes, had wished to close her ears and never hear the dreadful words, death, grave, dissolution. Why was death inevitable in this world? Oh, what horrible feelings must possess one leaving this beautiful sunny life for a gloomy valley leading to a dark grave. She could not understand God and had called upon him to answer, "Why dost thou send life in order to destroy it? Why impart love to the heart in order to make it suffer the bitterness of separation? Why only sanctify in order to put to death?" Heretofore her life had glided so peacefully. The first whirlpool she had encountered, but happily passed through, was Dr. Ulhart's declaration. She had never sung the Erlking since that eventful evening, and now a fearful cataract appeared before her life's way. Would it destroy the rudderless boat? No excitement was the physician's peremptory commands for Lady von Herbig. Ah, the poor woman herself was so frightfully excited. The thought of leaving her spoiled darling alone, without friends and money, was so horrible to her. Then, too, she reproached herself with, "Why have I reared her so that she must now be dependent upon others?" And her weakness pictured the condition darker than it really was. She now desired to do right. She now wished to provide for her child, and had not Herr Bolton, the wealthy merchant, intertwined himself about her? Would her child not be as safe with him as in Abraham's bosom? And was he not now acting the part of a faithful son towards her? Oh, if she could only lend her vision to Sibylla! At least this time she would see it to be the best, and with one act make amends for all her earlier omissions. Therefore, in this clear hour, she begged her daughter to become Herr Bolton's wife. She begged, she importuned, she entreated in the most tender expressions. But her daughter seemed to prefer walking barefoot than riding in an elegant equipment. But Sibylla could not maintain her opposition long against her mother's miserable, wan, pleading face. She answered evasively. The doctor had demanded freedom from all excitement. Then the sick one became more urgent. "I cannot die in peace," she cried. "Oh, will you not make my departure easy?" Sibylla suffered far greater pangs than her mother. She attempted to change the conversation and withdrew from the room. In vain. As a shipwrecked mariner turns his longing gaze upon the land that appears like a star of hope to save him from a watery grave, so Lady von Herbig clung to the hope of her daughter's marriage to Herr Bolton. Sibylla heard the cataract that threatened to engulf her, but she stood firmly and clung to the single branch that grew on its edge. Should she go to Theodora for advice? Oh no, her deepest secret that she had not even revealed to herself, let alone carried to her lips. Only the one who knew that could advise her. The mother grew worse, and Sibylla became exhausted account of the care which she would permit no one to share. Leaving the sick room to get some rest, her thoughts whirled like glowing footprints through her brain, for sleep and peace were fled. Another day her mother was able to persuade Sibylla more than usual, and she uttered the binding yes, and helplessly permitted the happy bridegroom to place an engagement ring, which was in readiness, upon her finger. Farewell, thou golden sun. It was a relief for Sibylla that Herr Bolton found it necessary to leave the city on the following morning to attend some urgent business, but he assured Lady von Herbig that he should return in 3 days, with which arrangement she felt satisfied. Now she seemed to improve. Joy apparently caused oblivion of pain, but it was a joyous misery to Sibylla to know she had done a loving act for her mother's sake, the great cost of which she would soon forget. And she did forget it, as well as the betrothed, and when the time came for his return, she shrank back in horror. On the day of Herr Bolton's arrival, Lady von Herbig was alone with her daughter. "Raise me up a little," she said. "I have something to say to you." Sibylla obeyed, then knelt by the bed and clasped the small white hand of the sick one in hers. "You are my dear, good child. You have given me nothing but pleasure. I feel that my end is near. Will you fulfill your dying mother's request?" Sibylla bowed her head. What more could she do than had already been done in the giving of herself away? To her, everything else was now of little concern. "See, I have only a few days to live. I feel death at my heart. When I die, where shall you go? We have no relatives. To your guardian, who has always treated us hardly and contemptibly? No, the wife's best place is in the house of her husband. Decide, my child, to become the wedded wife of thy Edward. To see you crowned with the myrtle wreath has always been my fondest wish. Fulfill it to me." Sibylla shrank inwardly. The roar of the cataract deafened her ear and soul.
She felt that she had fallen irrevocably into its depths. Then only a moment and all would be over, the sooner the better. Farewell, thou beaming sun. Will you, my angel? Yes. Oh, what joy you have given me! Now my eyes can close in peace. When shall it be? Tomorrow, for no time must be lost. The good Edward, oh, what a husband you will get, has everything ready. Even the bridal garments are prepared for you. One stipulation, dear mamma, begged Sibylla. Everything, everything. Oh, he will carry you in his arms, roses and violets. Let no strangers be present, interrupted Sibylla. At 12 o'clock the next day, an altar was erected near the bedside of the dying sick one. Beautiful flowers covered and adorned it. The dying mother, somewhat fantastically attired, sat up with folded hands. Before the altar knelt a marble image with living but today weary and troubled eyes. A white satin garment enfolded her slender figure, and had the myrtle wreath not crowned her head with its token of spring, one would have seen what appeared to be a maiden of snow. Tearless the bride knelt there. Kindly the bridegroom looked down upon her. The clergymen joined their hands. "Until death part you," he said. Then all was over. Lady von Herbig, under great excitement, embraced her children with hot tears and kisses. "You have sweetened my dying hour," she exclaimed to the one and the other. Then followed extreme exhaustion, and the physician directed all to leave the room. "It will not be long," he said. "She has concentrated all her strength, body and mind, in this hour. She will soon pass away." The next morning, Herr Bolton and his wife stood by the inanimate form of their mother. "Now you belong wholly to me," said the young husband. Sibylla could not weep. "Farewell, thou golden sun."
This marks the end of chapter 16. We now move into the next chapter of Sibylla's story, titled 3 Blows. They were children of 2 kings who loved each other dearly. They could not be united, for the deep sea rolled between. Wolf's landlady entered his room. "Here's a letter, and here's a paper for you." Wolf seized the letter. Why? It was his own letter, which he had posted 2 weeks previously to his uncle. Upon the outside was stamped, "Person addressed dead, opened by official authority and returned to writer." Dead! My good uncle dead, and I was not there to close his eyes. Alone, all alone, the old man dead, he who has done so much for me. Dead now when I need him so much. Deeply moved, Wolf pressed his head between his hands, while hot tears streamed from his eyes. But suddenly the tears ceased, and his eyes became motionless and staring. Their glance had mechanically rested upon a name in the paper lying before him. In one column stood 2 notices. The first read, "United in the holy bonds of matrimony, Edward Bolton, leather merchant of Larkov, and Sibylla von Herbig." The second read, "Departed this life at 3 o'clock a.m., Lady von Herbig, widow of Colonel M. von Herbig. This announcement is made in deep sorrow to her friends and acquaintances by her children, Edward Bolton, Sibylla Bolton, née von Herbig." 3 death notices. This marks the end of chapter 17. We now move into the next chapter of Sibylla's story, titled Discordant Notes. There's a love that lives a season, and one that lives for aye. There's a love that knows no treason, and one that will betray. There's a love that is deceiving, one that's worth the heart's believing, and with each comes joy or grieving to everyone some day. Which my lot shall be accorded, no more I have to guess. Fate its fiat has recorded, what love I shall possess. In thy hearts the love that seals it, every day more clear reveals it, and my heart exulting feels it, true love my life shall bless. The winter was more severe this season than usual. The sea was frozen over, and the ice had remained for a long time as firm as it was now. The people crossed it to and fro in wagons to the little neighboring islands. Lovely, quiet, and enclosed lay the little village in which our friends dwelt. Life flowed on with the utmost uniformity. When the day greeted the departing night, it said, "Mother Esther lies prostrate in her bed as usual." And when evening returned again, the day only added, "And Ingeborg sits by her side the same as ever." Christmas dawned. The day was short, and it grew dark very early. There were few festival preparations to be seen in the dwellings with which we are familiar. Ingeborg was sitting quietly in her own room. In former years her father had been with her. Today she was alone. An intense longing for her heavenly home came over the sick child. Just then the chiming of bells through the air called to vespers in the neighboring church. Ingeborg expected to sing in the angels' chorus, in which the assembled host announce with great joy good tidings to all people. She went out with faithful Johanna. Everywhere bright lights streamed over the white snow, all leading to the same place. Oh, how beautiful it was to see the single beams uniting in their journey to the sanctuary. Not one little cottage that did not send forth its worshippers. From Mother Esther's home stepped the slender Karen. Where was Wolf today? His light was absent. It did not beam Godward. Flickered it like a will-o'-the-wisp over the moors? In the church there was a sacred silence. The organ pealed forth, and the chorus of children sang. Ingeborg folded her hands. "Next year I shall rejoice with the choir above," she murmured. They sang the message of joy, but she forgot to unite with them. It was only the familiar child's song, but Ingeborg thought it had never sounded so beautiful before. At the conclusion, "Glory to God," all eyes were suddenly directed to the gallery. A deep, manly voice had burst forth, which was strange and yet familiar. Karen, too, looked up. Oh, what a glance! There stood Martin as first singer at his old post, Martin who had been absent now for 3 years. Their eyes met. Karen dropped hers on the hymn book, but the words danced before her, and she could sing no more. Ingeborg's face beamed with pleasure, but a deep pang passed through her heart. Martin's first visit was to the church. Mother Esther did not know of his return, and she hastened to carry the news. How the poor paralyzed one tried to express her joy, but only inarticulate sounds came from her lips. Then the 2 happy ones entered the room, radiant as a Christmas tree. After the first greeting, Martin drew a letter from his pocket and handed it to Ingeborg. "As I passed the post office, a messenger ran after me and asked me to deliver this to you," he explained. Ingeborg glanced at the superscription. It was from Berlin, from Theodora von Karing. She opened it and read it. Why was her face paler than usual? Why did she press her thin lips so firmly, as if to suppress a cry of anguish from within? When Martin and Karen learned the letter was not from Wolf, they had no further interest in it, and both went off together to visit Martin's parents. Frau Eriksson and Ingeborg were then left alone, and the latter read aloud the communication. It was expressed with that clear serenity which Theodora alone represented, and yet its contents were alarming. Theodora had written to Ingeborg, as she knew his mother to be bedridden, that a regard for Wolf, whom she heartily loved, had prompted her to send the letter. Wolf was ill,
bodily and mentally, and she deemed it very necessary that one of his own, preferably his uncle, hasten to Berlin at once, either to care for him there, or, what would be better, take him home for a while. She intimated that it was rumored how Wolf and gambling had occupied much of his time, but she imputed this to the influence of a young man who enticed him to such places, and from whom he must be wholly separated. She also related how Wolf had faithfully attended for a long time a poor family, and expressed the belief that he would soon be restored to the better way, but something must be done immediately. She had learned of his illness and of his desire to see her, but upon calling, his landlady had denied access to his room, saying that Wolf had changed his mind. Her opinion was that he had contracted gambling debts and was in the power of his inflexible creditors.
When the reading was finished, both women were silent. Ingeborg looked inquiringly upon the paralytic, but she indicated nothing. "Who shall go to Berlin? Ah, if his good uncle had only been spared," said Ingeborg after a pause. "Wolf must be in great need, or Theodora never would have written so." Frau Eriksson made a sign, from which her companion understood that she had no suggestion to offer. "Karen cannot travel. She would never be able to find the way there. Martin does not know Wolf, and it would be a pity to separate the two after his long absence. Mother, send me. Let me go." The old woman shook her head, looked out of the window, and then at Ingeborg's fragile form. "Oh, you mean that I cannot. I am stronger than you think. You do not know how much I can endure. Someone must go. Let me." Mother Esther lay silent for a while. Then she drew the young girl to her side and laid her hands upon her head. "I will talk to Martin," said Ingeborg, "and he can direct me. When I reach Berlin, I shall have Theodora's help." While Ingeborg was making preparations for the journey, the Karings at Berlin were arranging for Arnold's wedding, which was to take place in 3 days, and on this account many were unable to celebrate Christmas, for tailors, caterers, and florists were all employed for the occasion. Everybody was talking about the elegant apartments, the superb mirrored walls, the magnificent tapestries, the bride's princely dower. Everybody praised the happy pair. "Yes, yes," said the upholsterer, who had skillfully draped the damask curtains and was now observing the effect with unconcealed satisfaction. "Yes, yes, if such as we only had even a little bit of all this splendor. But one sits all day with the happiness of her children's legs in her lap, and another runs all his life without being able to lay hold of an outside coat lapel." It was therefore not in the rosiest mood that he entered his little cellar home, and observed with discontented eyes his own poor dilapidated curtains. But his wife had supper ready, and was so happy to have her husband at home in the evenings. The children sprang around the father, and had so many new discoveries to show in their little puppet man and nutcracker, that he soon forgot his useless ill humor, and related to his delighted wife all the gorgeous appointments of the new house. She sat and listened with open mouth, and finally said, "Oh, if I could only see it!" They who were soon to call this elegance their own had lived, meanwhile, in heaviness and gloom. Everything forced upon a person, as from the beginning this affair had been, is calculated to be an infliction. Arnold felt so toward his bride. She did not know how to win his affection, and he overlooked her good qualities and observed only her faults. But she really loved him after her fashion. She desired his respect and commendation, but he only gave her the most perfunctory attention. Then she began to mistrust him, even to follow him with icy glances. Arnold was aware of this, but made no change in his manner. If this was the condition of affairs during the 6 weeks' betrothal, what would it be in the marriage unto death? Arnold revolved this in his mind and became indescribably wretched. Account of this condition, his naturally indolent nature was aroused. He felt continually the ignominy of having sold himself for money, and in the depths of his really good-hearted heart he pitied his betrothed in her mistaken life's happiness. And yet what was her happiness? She craved a distinguished title, then he would give it to her. That she had any deeper sentiment to him he never dreamed. Very often he had been impelled to make an open confession to her, to give back her promise and shake off the yoke that lay so heavily upon him. But his parents, the dark despair of their future, the great pain of his mother, the reproachful face of his sister, who by this step would have promising happiness secured to her, all this stood before him. As the wedding day drew near, he felt proportionately miserable. This was the curse of the incompleteness which had accompanied him all his life, namely, that he had never been able to reach a right conclusion, never had the strength to will as he desired, still less to carry out his resolutions.
This marks the end of chapter 18. We now move into the next chapter of Sibylla's story, titled After the Dark, the Dawn. Every day is a fresh beginning. Listen, my soul, to the glad refrain, and spite of old sorrow and older sinning, and puzzles forecasted and possible pain, take heart with the day and begin again. Susan Coolidge. It is the eve of Arnold's wedding. He had much to do, hear, and say, and was obliged to play the happy bridegroom. At the same time, his thoughts were constantly with Sibylla, who, with her husband, had long since left Berlin, and whom he had not seen again. Why did he crave a better fate than hers? The evening passed amid flowers, poems, presents, and drinking of the best wines. Dr. Uhlhardt seasoned with his jests the Epicurean feast. He missed Wolf, and had missed him from the play resorts for some weeks, but he had searched for him, and rejoiced to find the youth no longer actually ill, but wholly demoralized and miserable. Wolf loved Sibylla, and this was ground enough for Uhlhardt's hatred. Besides, she loved him return, and that was ground enough for him to meditate revenge. Oh, this wily doctor penetrated their hearts more deeply than they themselves did. After the family had gone to banker Kotzky's to the preliminary wedding entertainment, Theodora escaped to her little room in order to obtain the rest she needed so much. Her unsightly disfigurements excused her from participation in large assemblies, and she had the exclusive immunity to remain only for the ceremony at the morrow's wedding. She had brought no light, so that she might be entirely alone with her thoughts. She remembered Arnold with sisterly love, wondering whether he would be really happy in his new relation. She feared he would suffer in many ways. And Wolf, for him it was only a question. Either he would be thoroughly reformed or wholly lost. While her thoughts were thus engaged, a lady was announced, who upon going to meet her proved to be Ingeborg. Theodora had not expected the young traveler, as she was not aware of the death of Wolf's uncle. Few words, however, were necessary to place all the circumstances before her, and only a brief reflection upon them to enable Theodora to recognize that Ingeborg's coming was not only the sole thing to be done, but also the best. After the young traveler had been rested and refreshed, and first of all learned of Wolf's physical improvement, both women conversed earnestly together. Theodora was well acquainted with life in the great world, its temptations and dangers, and now in her retirement she also followed with deep interest the development of persons and situations in her own immediate connection. With her clear judgment, her helpful inclinations, and large influence, which although somewhat concealed, was none the less marked, Theodora had learned of Wolf's fall as well as Uhlhardt's treachery. But her lips remained closed on this subject. Meanwhile, she imparted to Ingeborg her apprehensions that Wolf had been led to contract debts and might be the prey of usurers who carried on a nefarious business in large cities, and who brought many young men to destruction. She also interested herself in the life and misery of many at Berlin. Ingeborg was scarcely imaginative enough to conceive it all, accustomed as she had always been to the simplest ways, but listened in amazement.
"Oh," she thought, "if such horrible things take place in these lovely dwellings, I would be far from them." But comfortingly, Theodora's words also reassured her, as she talked of the golden spring of Christian love, which, though often unattractive outwardly, and even invisible, still permeated this great city, offering its rescuing draught to old and young, rich and poor, as well as to the sorrowing, the lonely, and the forsaken. With this, Ingeborg's heart beat responsively, for she could recognize God's great hand here also, building up this glorious kingdom, to further which they who would help must give up the crown for this life.
"Wolf will do well here yet," she said softly.
"I think so too," replied Theodora, "but he will not receive this glorious call until he has been baptized in the sea of great sorrows." They both decided that Ingeborg should wait until the wedding was over, then visit Wolf and ask him, now in the holidays, to go to his sick mother's home to recruit his health. As to his debts, Theodora begged that Ingeborg should exert all her influence to induce Wolf to leave his affairs in the hands of a reliable man, whose name she mentioned. "Do you know," she continued, "whether they have money enough at home to meet all these obligations?" "Oh, much, plenty," replied Ingeborg. The next morning the Carings were astonished to greet Ingeborg as their guest. "She has business in Berlin," explained Theodora, and as they were accustomed to question none of her assertions, and as the approaching wedding occupied all thoughts, there was no curiosity excited. Ingeborg felt out of place in the midst of all this excitement. The whole atmosphere lay as a mountain on her soul. When Arnold approached Ingeborg, she seemed to be a reminding spirit of the better part of his life, but he exerted a gloomy impression upon her. How could he be so joyless and dissatisfied? Intuitively, Ingeborg felt that this marriage had not been made in heaven, and she became more and more timid in this great aristocratic house, and wished she might go home this day instead of on the morrow. She went earlier than the others to the church in order to see all without being observed. After the ceremony, she would return with Theodora. Everything conspired to render her solemn. What a great church! She had never seen one so splendid. Garlands of flowers were festooned, carpets laid, lights flashed, and the house was filled with spectators and wedding guests. At length the bridal pair entered. Ingeborg could understand how this cold, stately lady inspired no love. How dignified Arnold appeared, so different from his usual manner. And yet her eyes wandered until Wolf came. Dr. Uhlhardt was with him. That was his evil spirit. But was this pale, dejected young man before her eyes the same strong, vigorous Wolf who had rescued her from death? She could not look away from him. Had the people here made him so white and ill? He must leave. He must breathe pure air again. How fortunate that she had come. She would go even sooner than she had decided. The ceremony being over, the wedding procession passed out of the church. Wolf was one of the last to leave. He did not look up. His thoughts drew his eyes downward. A frightful reaction was taking place within him. In the instant, whether he should begin a new life, become a new man, everything hinged upon that, in order to gain the noble prize, or, in an instant, lose this prize forever. He followed the crowd mechanically, when suddenly his hand was seized, and an entreating voice said, "Wolf, stay here. Let the others go. Come with me." He was so ill he scarcely surprised to see Ingeborg before him, but he remained beside her, feeling as though he belonged to her. His home, his childhood, his sick mother reached out to him through her a hand, and he grasped it. The carriages were gone, and the spectators had dispersed, but there was one carriage remaining without, containing Theodora looking for Ingeborg. At a glance, she observed what had occurred, and without losing her self-control, she calmly invited both to enter. They soon arrived in her quiet room. Here Theodora withdrew to superintend preparations for their entertainment.
Wolf sat beside Ingeborg, having no apparent control of his will, indifferent to everything. He scarcely inquired for his mother or for Karen, nor how Ingeborg came. The latter summoned all her strength, for she realized she must now be Wolf's stay. How gladly would she have accepted his guidance in everything, but he remained in perfect apathy. She could scarcely have borne it had the hope of better things peered like a star through the present clouds.
She told him of Martin's return on Christmas and of his rich father's joy, and his desire to give some outward expression as a token of his gratitude. Wolf listened quietly. Christmas? That had already passed, and Sibylla lost to him. Where had the succeeding few days flown? Ingeborg became exhausted. All her thoughts centered in the desire to have him at home. "Wolf," she entreated, "we will go away from here." He bowed his head abstractedly. "Shall I go to help pack your trunk?" she asked. Pack? This question seemed to recover his senses. "Ingeborg, I cannot go. I must stay." "No, indeed. Why cannot you go?" Wolf hid his face in his hands and cried, "Go away. I am a miserable creature. Go back alone. I must remain here." "What retains you?" continued Ingeborg. "My debts." "Debts?" reiterated Ingeborg cheerfully. "Yes, I have debts, many debts, at my boarding house, to Dr. Uhlhardt, to Jews, and no money to pay them." Ingeborg sprang up. "Oh, I have so much money, so much!" And drawing from her pocket a packet of bills, she exclaimed, "There, Wolf, take it, take it! It is all yours!" While half weeping and half laughing, she laid the money in his hands. Now, for the first time in her life, she rejoiced in the possession of money, and in her thoughtfulness to bring all she had at home with her. Wolf remonstrated against receiving it. To accept it seemed more dishonorable than anything else, but Ingeborg begged and insisted. Just then Theodora entered. How well she understood the method of restoring tranquility out of agitation, without intruding and without wounding Wolf's sensibilities. The objections had soon been dispelled, and she was freely discussing with him the best thing to do. She undertook to pay Uhlhardt after Wolf's departure. She accompanied him to his boarding house in the evening to arrange matters there. She settled the Jew's account, who was astonished and not too well pleased to have his money returned so soon. And when they came back, after arranging all these difficult affairs, they found Ingeborg quite rested and restored. Wolf, too, was much changed. This burden of debt had lain upon his soul like lead, and he trusted himself to Theodora's guidance as if he had been a child and she his mother, without realizing the dependence. She also began to exert an irresistible influence over him. Did he too feel that she stood upon that eminence which judges human nature humanely, and that she could forgive all because she understood all? While Ingeborg forgave all because she loved, Theodora, in spite of her real earnestness, seemed to have nothing to forgive, and verified that beautiful sentiment: all must ardently recognize as well as believe that man himself has nothing to forgive. "You will come to the train early tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, said Ingeborg as Wolf parted from them. Wolf promised. "Yes, at 8 o'clock I will be there. But until that time, 10 hours will elapse, and there may much happen meanwhile." Wolf went home to his boarding house. The Carrings had not yet returned from the wedding, but Theodora and Ingeborg did not wait for them. The former lay awake a long while thinking of her family. A strange sorrow withheld its blow far from her. Ingeborg was weary, but her heart was happy, and her lips murmured softly, "God's angels keep my beloved from trouble, harm, or danger forevermore."
This marks the end of Chapter 19. We now move into the next chapter of Sibylla's story, titled Beyond.
Life's a tortured, booming gurge. Winds of passion strike and urge, and transmute to broken surge foam crests of ambition. Death, men say, is like a sea that engulfs mortality, treacherous, dreadful, blindingly, full of storm and terror. M. Field. Let us now return to the wedding festival. It was celebrated in the Hotel R. The beautiful, spacious drawing room had been adorned with exquisite plants and flowers which concealed the walls, while fountains here and there rustled their melodies during the pauses of the music. Around the table, on which hundreds of wax tapers glowed in rich silver candelabra, while the rarest viands and choicest wines in the world vied with one another, sat a large company, partly of the nobility, partly of those representing the aristocracy of money, outward show concealing inward emptiness, as false hair the bald heads. In the center sat enthroned the young bridal couple. Arnold more attentive and amiable than usual, his bride cold and stately as ever. It seemed as though the greater part of life had been spent before a mirror in order to regulate every movement of her body, every expression of her face, after the strictest model of propriety. Had she as well, one was tempted to ask, educated and molded her heart with even a tithe of this care and consistency? An old proverb says, "Out of one wedding, two usually come." This would appear probable today from all indications. Herr von Lenxering had been the past 6 weeks devotedly attentive to the chosen one of his heart, and Eugenie von Karing looked upon her suitor with no unfriendly eyes. A trick of fate, perhaps also some human intervention, had decreed to have them both neighbors at table. That was a favorable opportunity. The young man softly whispered to her fair companion many little phrases that made her blush for joy. Lady von Karing looked benignly on the pair. When Eugenie should have married this rich young man, and Arnold had just performed a deed that had produced rejoicing, then were not the wishes of her heart as well as the necessities of her house satisfied? Still she was in anxious suspense. The fortune of her stepdaughter lay in a well-formed contract in her father's hands, and the embarrassments of her husband had reached their utmost limit. Indeed, he could scarcely wave them off until this very day, when a large sum of money was due and must be in his hands. Surely banker Kowski could not deny him the favor of a loan. His honor was their honor. His daughter now bore the name of their son. "To the one we love," said banker Kowski laughingly to his new relative Eugenie as he leaned toward her over the table. "I think we not only have a newly wedded pair at table, but a betrothed one," he added jestingly to Lady von Karing, and in tones so loud that the neighbors of the Baroness all smiled and looked at Herr von Lenxering and Eugenie. The former seemed ready to receive congratulations then and there, but Eugenie begged him to speak to Papa and Mama first and not to make any announcement here. The scene passed, but not until the news had traveled the circuit of the table. But the air was stifling, all were oppressed, and by universal consent the table was deserted, and all withdrew to the adjoining salon. Here dance music quickened the blood in the veins of the young people, while the older guests sought the smaller rooms or cozy corners in groups as they found it congenial. Everyone was perfectly free and unrestrained. But what have the two old gentlemen, Baron von Karing and banker Kowski, to have so softly and earnestly to each other in yonder window niche? The Baron growing more and more persuasive, the banker more and more cold and reserved. On the Baron's forehead stand great drops of perspiration, while the banker's countenance remains as unmoved as that of a speculator when one would seek to read therein the rise or fall of stocks on the change. At length he remarks icily, "Herr Baron, do not mistake. My daughter and my money are two different things. The one I have given. Make no expectation on that account of the other."
The Baron talked so earnestly, it seemed as though one could hear his vehement words. It was in vain. At length he became silent and exhausted. The banker turned away smiling. Nearby a game of cards was being arranged, and he said, "Shall we join this party?" At this juncture an old gentleman approached the two with a wine-glass and bottle. "Baron, this is to the welfare of your house, on which has been grafted today a new branch." "Long may it live," replied the Baron, accepting the glass and draining it, but his eyes were sunken and his countenance ashy.
The banker added his thanks, touched his glass to both, and laughed cordially. The next morning, Wolf was up betimes to prepare for his departure. He hoped nothing from this home-going, but he embraced it as his only method of escape, with gratitude. His landlady rushed into the room, pale with terror. "Herr Erikson, do you know what has happened?" "What has happened?" inquired Wolf. "Baron von Karing has committed suicide. He shot himself last night." Wolf grasped the table. Everything whirled in the room. "Arnold?" he cried. "No, the old Baron. It was almost 3 o'clock when he returned from the wedding. An hour later his servants heard a fearful report, and hastening to his side, found him dead. So the milkman has just told me." Away with apathy and weakness, Wolf hurried to the Karings. How changed everything was! Despite the early hour, crowds of people were running hither and thither in great excitement. No servant announced him, and he passed unhindered to the Baron's chamber. What a sight! Arnold and banker Kautsky were there alone. Poor Arnold, slaughtered in vain! Wolf hastened toward him to embrace him, but he was repulsed. The old banker, standing coldly near, shook his head. He thought, could he not have taken a simple powder if he were determined upon this? That would have made no fuss and trouble like this. A physician's certificate for apoplexy might have been secured, and I should not have grudged the money for that. But, and with an air of disgust he gazed upon the lifeless form. The young Baroness entered and drew her husband to an adjoining room. Her heart was cold. Education and custom had formed a crust of ice over it, but as this violent deed interrupted the course of everyday life, so it also penetrated this hard coating, and the warm spring of love that exists in most women's hearts gushed forth freely. She had always been restricted and restrained by a sense of propriety, and it was well now that she could act. If we could have wished a loving hand to rest upon the old Baroness, Eugenie and Theodora, they had no reason henceforth to complain of any want of care and sympathy from Arnold's wife. Like a warm current, this love fell upon her husband, and in spite of all other thoughts, it burned his soul like fire. Had he deserved it? She to whom he had behaved as though he had only married her for money. She who now bore a stained name, and who must, with all her short-sightedness, realize the motives of those around her. But true love is a rose which blooms in the midst of thorns. In the springing clover fields it seldom thrives. The first sad days over, the stunning effects were gradually relaxed. Visits of condolence and letters of sympathy came from all sides. Herr von Lenkschering wrote that he, as standing at such a distance from the respected Karing family, dared not intrude, but ventured to send this token of sympathy in such an extraordinarily sad calamity, etc. Lady von Karing received the communication in good faith, but Eugenie wept hot, bitter tears. In the very last book he gave her stood the words, "Faithful even in misfortune." Soon after this occurrence, wagons came to carry trunk after trunk to the railway station. The young Baron, with his wife, his mother, and sister, set out upon a long journey through Austria. Through the young Baroness's influence, her father was persuaded to accept the responsibility of settling the estate.
They are now off to the far south, where we shall leave them to begin a new life. Leave them for the present, in the hope that having experienced the emptiness of this world's happiness, they will strive for the higher and better way. The only elegant apartments of the Carring mansion stand deserted and lorn, awaiting another division of life to be enacted therein.
This is the end of Part 6. Sibylla's story continues, and we will carry on in the next video. Thank you for listening, and remember to subscribe to the channel for more content. See you in Part 7 of Sibylla's story.